Hi guys, it's Debbie, and as every month, the time has come to share what I've been watching, so films and series and documentaries. And as always, you get to share what you've been watching, what you would recommend. So make sure to leave a comment down below with your suggestions, because as you know, a lot of what I watch is actually based on what you send me. This month, I was lucky enough to watch quite a large number of titles, so let's jump right into the list because there is a lot to cover, and I'm going to start with some of the films I enjoyed the most. One film I absolutely adored is Lady Vengeance, a Korean movie directed by Park Chan-wook, known for creating some of the most popular Korean films in the West, for example, The Handmaiden and Oldboy. As a matter of fact, Oldboy, Lady Vengeance and another film called Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance are part of what has later become known as the director's Vengeance trilogy, covering themes of revenge, violence, ethics, guilt. Lady Vengeance in particular is the story of a woman who is released from prison after serving a lengthy sentence for allegedly murdering a young boy. Thanks to her social skills and a series of favours, while in prison she develops a net of useful friendships and she advances her knowledge on specific topics, all which will become useful for her master plan once she is released. I'm trying to keep the spoilers to a bare minimum because this film is fantastic. The acting, the storytelling, the cinematography, the dialogues, this is a film you will want to see. And now I'm curious about the other film in the trilogy I yet have to see, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. Another film I really enjoyed is The Peanut Butter Falcon, which is one of the few movies with a disabled lead character in a story which isn't just the usual pity party that occurs when there is a disabled member of the cast. On the contrary, this is a great film in which disability plays an important role, but without limiting the whole film. The plot covers the journey undertaken by our protagonist, who escapes the care facility in which he is living, and a friend he meets on the way, who is also on the run and who is bringing a lot of mystery and repressed emotions with him. The two immediately bond and experience all sorts of adventures, all the while a social worker from the care facility is on the lookout for them. I then decide to finally catch up with the Darjeeling Limited, a film which I'd already started watching years ago, but while I was in a mindset which didn't allow me to appreciate all the nuances of a Wes Anderson film. As a matter of fact, Wes Anderson is known for creating self-contained worlds for each of his films, all with peculiar and eccentric styles, quirky, memorable characters who have very unexpected dialogues, and then there is a huge visual component made of specific colour palettes and obsessive symmetries, which are also present in how the camera moves around the scene. And watching the Darjeeling Limited immediately dragged me back into the Wes Anderson world and really left me needing more. It's the story of three brothers who are travelling across India in order to complete a sort of spiritual journey. But from the moment they step on board the train that will take them on their journey, one adventure after the other occurs, while they're also dealing with their own personal family issues. It was beautiful, I just couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Then I have to mention a great series I watched called The Queen's Gambit, which is basically Netflix's big show of the moment, and I can definitely see why. The Queen's Gambit is the story of a chess prodigy who quickly climbs the ranks of international chess tournaments. She's competing against the best of the best. Her whole life revolves around chess, but at the same time she's still dealing with a lot of personal issues, substance addiction, mental health, feeling abandoned, the absence of her parents, financial issues, relationships, all while under incredible pressure. Although chess may appear as something hard to convey on screen in an engaging manner which will keep you interested for a whole season, this series was really captivating. It presented the matches in a clear but realistic manner. The actors were actually playing the matches. It had a great character analysis, great cinematography. It was an overall well put together show. Later on in the month, I actually ended up watching a totally unrelated film, but which actually presents some similarities to the ideas behind The Queen's Gambit. The film is called Puzzle, and it speaks about puzzles. Basically, the protagonist, portrayed by Kelly MacDonald, is a housewife stuck in a very monotonous routine where she is never given any credit at home. She just puts up with everything and does everything in a very quiet manner. But she discovers joy in solving jigsaw puzzles. She just has a natural talent for it. And when she finds a puzzle partner, a puzzle champion portrayed by Irfan Khan, her world takes a complete twist. This film is not well known, but still it has a very slow, intimate depiction of habits and passions, dreams suppressed by routines, being much more than what other people think of you, and the quiet love for something. Next up, I watched a film called Tully, which was extensively covered upon its release, but which isn't spoken about that much anymore. And it was spoken about a lot because it features Charlize Theron, but in a very different character from her usual glamorous self, let's say. She portrays a woman who is juggling a lot in life after the birth of her latest child. She was already experiencing the regular difficulties of motherhood with her previous children, so budgeting, stress, lack of sleep, peer pressure, and with the little one, everything is even harder. Until she decides to hire a night nanny, so basically a babysitter who comes over in the night, looks after the kids, allowing her to rest. But the presence of this new person changes the family's lifestyle in a much bigger way than you would imagine. Another film I watched was one that suddenly appeared on Netflix with a very mysterious appeal to it. But at the same time, everybody was asking everybody if it was any good because it was so mysterious. The film is called The House, and yes, it's terrifying. It's the story of a couple who are granted asylum in the UK after fleeing from the war in Sudan. They are assigned a council house, but which is completely run down. They try to settle into the community, but they face racism. And after a while, they start witnessing odd things in their house. They start hearing noises, they start seeing things, until it becomes a full-blown nightmare horror situation. So it covers all a range of topics, something which is a plus when picking horror movies, as they often tend to focus on just one scary topic. Trust me, if you're looking for a different kind of horror movie, this could be an interesting choice. Okay, now let's see if there were any series before getting back to films. I think I only watched one called Crashing, because it stars Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who is the creator and star of Fleabag, another great horror comedy series which I would absolutely recommend if you haven't watched it yet. In Fleabag, she portrayed a young woman who is learning to navigate adult life in a very confused, awkward, angry, free-spirited manner, something which often doesn't go hand in hand with the views of those close to her. And in this other series I watched, Crashing, she portrays a very similar character, but who is so messed up to the point of being annoying and ruining a lot of situations. She lives with a group of friends of hers who all have their own peculiarities, and she is just the rogue card ready to stir things up. It's no way as good as Fleabag, but if you like that series and you're looking for more of that kind of character, this is an interesting pick. Then, moving back to films, I rewatched a movie from a few years back called Ponyo, which was a huge deal when we were at school here in Italy. I don't know if this was the same all over the world, but everybody was talking about it, everybody was watching it, and I think it might have to do with the fact that it was heavily featured at the Venice Film Festival, and then it won other awards at another film festival here in Bologna, or it might just be me remembering it all enhanced. Anyway, Ponyo is a beautiful, beautiful Studio Ghibli film about a little boy who bonds with a little fish he finds by the ocean. He names her Ponyo, and the two develop a strong friendship while also having to deal with her relationship with her underwater wizard father. This is probably one of the most well-known Studio Ghibli films alongside My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away. So if you're starting to get into that world, I would recommend starting from one of these films. I then watched other two Studio Ghibli films, as one is the spin-off of the other. The original movie is Whisper of the Heart, which in my opinion is a great example of the detailing that goes in Studio Ghibli movies, because you can freeze any frame from this film and you will see everything in full detail, even the decorations on a vase on a balcony in the distance in the background. Whisper of the Heart is a coming-of-age story of a schoolgirl who is struggling with deciding what she wants to do with her future, with love, with family relationships, with school, and she starts to see some clarity after visiting an antique shop and befriending the owner and his grandson. Now, out of all the objects at the antique shop, there is one very specific one, and that is the statue of a cat nicknamed the Baron. Now we find this character again in the spin-off movie called The Cat Returns. In this other film, a girl saves a cat from being run over in city traffic. Without realizing, she just saved the prince of a mysterious cat kingdom. She ends up traveling to that kingdom where a huge adventure happens and where we find again the Baron. Now, I love cats, but just like any other animal, I'm not obsessed with their cuteness. So I didn't expect to enjoy a movie specifically about cats, but instead I loved it. And I loved how their kingdom was created, how they interact in a humanoid way. And again, the detailing was exceptional. Another Studio Ghibli title, which shows the extensive curation that goes into these films, is Arrietty, which features a family of borrowers. So little humans who live in the house of larger, regular-sized humans, and they get by stealing small objects from them, maybe a cube of sugar or a needle, things which would be insignificant to us, but which mean everything to them. Until one day, they are spotted. The most beautiful aspect of this film is seeing small things in incredible detail. So leaves and bugs and common household objects, raindrops and berries and tiny mugs of tea. I then watched a film which I really wanted to watch back during my teenage years, which then I completely removed from my memory, and that is Wild Child, starring Emma Roberts as your stereotyped LA spoilt kid who is sent off to a boarding school in the rainy British countryside. It's not an award winner, it doesn't even go close to that, but this is your average teen girl redemption transformation comedy movie, which is perfect when you're 14. It reminded me a little of films like St. Trinian's, which back when I was a teenager, emo in 2007, were a huge deal. I then watched Crazy Stupid Love, one of the most famous romantic movies, but which I never watched. Although the main character is a guy who is trying to get through his divorce and get back on the dating scene, the movie analyzes love as seen from all the other characters, who are all experiencing different grades and versions of love, from the kid who falls in love with his babysitter to Ryan Gosling picking up Emma Stone in a bar. It wasn't really my kind of thing, but I can see why it was so popular for so many years. It's your classic big cast, famous people all falling in love with one another. I must admit I kind of watched it just to get it off my watch list. Next up I watched Glengarry Glen Ross, which really proves how great acting can hold up even the simplest setting. In this case, we only have 4 real estate agents who are threatened to be fired if they don't improve their sales within the following days. There's no huge intricate storyline, well-crafted sets, special effects. It mostly relies on the interactions amongst the character, their anger and desperation to keep their job, their resentment towards a trainer who is sent there supposedly to motivate them, but which ends up just insulting them. And again, from just a few years earlier, end of the 80s, I rewatched Die Hard, which I used to watch. I had to watch quite a few times back in the days because my brother was obsessed with the saga. For many years, this was considered the ultimate action film, and still to date, this is considered one of the best action stories of all time, and it definitely helped to crystallize Bruce Willis as the white tank top hero ready to save the day. And ultimately, it was one of the few action movies that made it to the Oscars. Briefly summed up, in Die Hard, a group of terrorists take over a skyscraper during a Christmas party, keeping the partygoers hostage, and Bruce Willis's character has to save everybody, whatever it takes. Another fun fact is that this was Alan Rickman's first film ever. I then rewatched a couple of Michael Moore documentaries because during the previous month, October, I had started rewatching a few of his. Michael Moore is one of the most famous documentary directors, mostly because of the uncomfortable nature of the themes he covers. He digs deep in what goes on just behind the regular news facade. He is known for annoying people until he gets to the truth. This month I rewatched Where to Invade Next, in which he basically travels to various European countries. He goes to Italy, France, Slovenia, and he observes how different aspects of society are managed there, such as helping people with drug addiction, school meals for kids, a healthy work-life balance. And he tries to see why a similar management isn't adopted in the United States. He tries to see how it could be applied in his home country, as always with a lot of the staple Moore irony. I then rewatched what is probably Moore's most famous documentary, and that is Fahrenheit 9/11, which covers the Bush administration, the attack on the Twin Towers, the war in the Middle East, basically what was all going on during that period, the lives of soldiers at war in Iraq. Whatever your political position is, I would highly recommend watching this documentary because it offers a lot of interesting topics for a discussion. And after that, I watched for the first time the sequel to this documentary called Fahrenheit 11/9, which instead covers the Trump administration, along with a series of related topics, such as the water crisis in his hometown of Flint, Michigan. I didn't find it as engaging as some of his other works, but it was still pretty interesting and again a source of a lot of food for thought. Lastly, I rewatched one of his hardest to watch documentaries because of the nature of the topic, and that is Bowling for Columbine, which is about gun violence in the United States. It mostly focuses on how this affects kids with school shootings and home casualties, as well as how gun ownership is handled as a whole in the United States. And some things are shocking to watch from a country like Italy, where most people wouldn't even consider touching a firearm, let alone imagine their kids walking into school one day and never coming home because of a school shooting. At this point, I think I should quickly mention a short film I watched this month, which speaks about school shootings, and that is If Anything Happens, I Love You. This short animated film is heartbreakingly beautiful. I knew it was going to be sad, but I didn't expect it to be that touching, and everybody I know had the same reaction to it. The figures depicted are a couple who have lost their daughter and are reminiscing all their happy moments together, all while dealing with grief, and it's moving in just a few simple sketches. Watching it won't take up a lot of your time, so maybe go give it a go. Okay, now let's talk about some weird films I watched this month. Probably the weirdest film on the list is Holy Motors, a French film which gives absolutely no context to what is going on. Prepare yourself to see a guy being driven around the city to various appointments, which include dressing up as a weird, violent guy who kidnaps a model from a cemetery, simulating sex in a motion capture suit, which then renders as a snake. He disguises himself as an old lady begging for money. I just had no clue what was going on. I just kept thinking, what the fuck? The other weird film I watched was Mandy with Nicolas Cage. In this film, Nicolas Cage portrays a guy enjoying his life with his girlfriend, chilling in the evening, talking about the universe, until a creepy cult plans on kidnapping the girlfriend with the most grotesque plans in mind. I'm going to leave the mystery at that. Feel free to watch the film to experience the full psychedelic trip to hell. I then watched another film which wasn't weird in that sense, but which was incredibly bizarre while still having a huge ensemble cast. The film is called The Dead Don't Die, with Adam Driver, Bill Murray, Tilda Swinton, Selena Gomez, Steve Buscemi, Danny Glover, Chloe Sevigny, just to mention a few. And they all portray people who either live or work in a small town which is suddenly attacked by zombies. So all the characters have to try to survive, but while acting with a very deadpan, dark humour style and unexpected lines. Just nothing in the film goes the way you would expect it to. Okay, then you know how I'm always watching A24 films and I'm praising them for being unique and interesting with beautiful cinematography, deep and different storylines. Well, this month I watched a terrible A24 film. Even considered by some the worst A24 film ever. The movie is called The Vanishing of Sydney Hall, in which Logan Lerman portrays a tormented writer who feels guilty for the way his books may have negatively influenced his readers, and he is going through a moment of realization and depression. Interesting, you may say. Yeah, the premise is. The problem was the delivery. The character analysis is inexistent, or to better say, it feels like the worst of early Tumblr. So that obnoxious sadness, I don't know how to explain this. Let's just say that if you're looking for a Logan Lerman in a conscious film about art and navigating life in all its, even in its negative aspects, I would rather recommend watching something like The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Unfortunately, even the next film on the list is one which didn't totally convince me. But this is a film which really splits audiences between those who think it's a beautiful depiction of struggling to navigate life in cities like New York, and those who think it's just pretentious rubbish. The film is called Frances Ha, and it stars Greta Gerwig years before her huge fame as a director of films like Lady Bird and Little Women. And in the movie, she portrays a dancer who is struggling to get by in the frenetic New York City lifestyle, including dating, financial stability, rent and flatmates, her career. And Frances Ha is directed by Noah Baumbach, who is known for taking really common situations, dialogues, relatable issues, which may not make an epic story, but which make the overall film really enjoyable and which last in time. For example, he directed Marriage Story, the Meyerowitz stories, The Squid and the Whale. But I don't know, there was just something here which didn't really convince me. I'm still trying to elaborate my thoughts on this. But if we really want to talk about bad films, like legit bad films, like 1% on Rotten Tomatoes bad films, I have the perfect example for you. Because another film I watched on the list is called Twisted. This is a wannabe thriller film about a string of grisly murders which all seem to tie to one of the detectives on the case, specifically men she has dated or had sex with. This had a lot of potential because not only do you have the investigative part of the story, but then all the other side of like feeling guilty and having to explain things to people and suspicions arising. But no, this was absolutely awful. The acting was terrible. The storytelling looked like it had been made for some kids who just wanted to write a creepy plot. And the weirdest thing is that the characters are portrayed by really good and really well-known names. There's Samuel L. Jackson, Ashley Judd, Andy Garcia. I'm very confused about all of this. I then rewatched a really funny film I have seen many times, and that is Due Date, starring Zach Galifianakis and Robert Downey Jr., along with a few other famous names like Jamie Foxx and Juliette Lewis. And it's the story of two very different guys who, due to a series of unfortunate circumstances, have to travel across America by car together. Of course, this creates a ton of funny situations, as well as using a lot of dark humour. I've seen this so many times, but it just gets me every time. Then I did a little digging in the world of lesser known films, and I found a Robert Pattinson film years before who he is now, alongside the biggest directors in some of the biggest films, and the movie is called How to Be, which basically depicts that phase of your life during the 20s when you have no clue what you want to do, so you end up doing nothing. Your parents come from a completely different background, so they can't relate to that situation. You want to be a successful person, but then you're kept down by issues such as anxiety, and then do you even want to be that successful famous person? Is that what you really want to do? Well, to figure things out or complicate them even more, Robert Pattinson's character decides to save up all his money to hire a therapist from Canada who follows him around. I don't know, it's fun and cute and so 2008. And if you watch this film and then right after you watch one of Pattinson's latest roles, his acting is unrecognizable. It did such a huge leap. Then I watched a film called Ingrid Goes West, about which I knew absolutely nothing. I went into this even without seeing the trailer, so I had no idea what to expect. And boy was I surprised, positively. The protagonist is an awkward woman portrayed by Aubrey Plaza, who moves to LA, where she tries to fit in this fancy socialite influencer lifestyle. As a matter of fact, she tries to befriend a popular influencer, the kind of one who posts cute pics of her food and yoga and basically showcases a super curated version of her life. But this all gets out of hand because the protagonist is just a little obsessive. It's both really funny, but also a little depressing because it really shows how the internet can warp our perception of life and our idea of what perfection really is. I then watched an old film called Manson Family Vacation, throughout which I had no idea whether I should have been laughing or not. Because this is the story of a guy who becomes obsessed with the life of Charles Manson and the crimes connected to him. And when he shares this with his brother, at first it seems just like a morbid curiosity, that kind of curiosity we have towards weird and gruesome things. But as the two set out to get to know more about the Manson family and everything that happened, the more things get out of hand. It's not an incredibly good movie, but the thing that really stuck with me is that it's really touching and meaningful, and then out of the blue, it just throws something really hilarious at you, and you have no idea whether you should be laughing or not. Then next up on the list is Thoroughbreds, a film which I'd been meaning to watch for the longest time. Now, I have no idea in which genre to place this film, because part of it is a dark comedy, part of it is a thriller, part of it is sad and dramatic, part of it is straightforward weird. Anyway, it's the story of two old friends who get closer again during their teenage years in a very intimate and weird manner. They have these progressively darker conversations which revolve around a lot of bizarre topics, including the hate towards the stepfather of one of the two. Of course, this leads to nothing good. I have no other way of describing this without spoilers. I would just recommend watching it. Then, after many years, I rewatched Rocky, the original film from 1976. This is probably one of the most famous films of all time, and it focuses on an Italian-American boxer portrayed by Sylvester Stallone. He is training as hard as he can in order to become a successful fighter, but the plot also focuses on other aspects of his life, such as trying to be financially stable, dating a girl, and his character influenced a whole generation of fitness lovers and non. Just a few notes from the Rocky theme will get you pumped up to do anything. Next up, I watched Patterson, a really easygoing film on Amazon Prime, which had basically been begging me to watch it until I gave in. Now, one of the elements which made me watch this film is that the protagonist, who is portrayed by Adam Driver, is a bus driver in New Jersey. And when I used to live in New Jersey, every week I would take one of those New Jersey transit buses that would go through all the little Jersey cities, and they would just throw themselves at ridiculously high speeds on the highway all the way to New York City. Anyway, it was a bit of a reminiscing moment. Basically, the plot is about this bus driver who is also a poet. He's always writing down his notes in a little book, and most of the film is a gentle portrayal of his daily life with his girlfriend, which is very repetitive with a few stable activities. It's a very mild, minimalist film. It's mostly about the beauty in little things, in people watching, daily small town activities. Then towards the end of the month, I watched Palm Springs, one of the few 2020 American films starring Andy Samberg as a guy who is stuck in a time loop, reliving the same events of one particular day over and over again. One day, another woman gets stuck in the same loop with him, and after a rocky start, they have to try to figure out a way together, while also trying to make the most out of the situation with a ton of irony. This is actually a really good film to come out this year, as it's very light-hearted, something very funny just to cheer you up and get your mind off of things. And it also includes a fantastic dance sequence. Then I watched a couple of Christmas movies, as the holidays are not far away at this point. The first one I watched was Last Christmas, starring Emilia Clarke and Henry Golding. Now, this film is just your cheesy, funny, romantic comedy movie. It's nothing particularly special, but it's cute and it's heartwarming. The problem is that it received a ton of hate. Even already from the trailer, people were saying it included spoilers, which is absolute nonsense. So throughout the whole film, I just couldn't stop thinking of this criticism. I was like looking out for signs of how awful it apparently was. Briefly summed up, it's the story of a woman who is going through a rough patch in life. Everything is just going wrong until she meets basically just the most perfect guy you could ever imagine, and her life starts to take a more positive twist. I think I should have ignored the criticism and just enjoyed it as a sort of like guilty pleasure film. It's just the thing you put on when it's cold outside and you just want to watch something cheerful and Christmassy. If we're looking for a really bad Christmas movie, then we don't have to look that far, because another Christmas movie I watched this month was atrocious. It's called Christmas Made to Order, and it's a Netflix Christmas movie. Netflix is notorious for making some of the most god-awful holiday films. This film is the love story between a woman who is obsessed with everything Christmas and a Grinch kind of guy who doesn't see the excitement in the holidays. That's the plot. There is a sprinkling of Christmas decorations and how to pick the best Christmas tree, but that really is about it. There's a lot of fake snow, perfectly blue skies, and then one thing I absolutely hate in movies is when the characters look impeccable in every moment. When you just bump on them in the street and, hey, look at that amazing blow dryer, look at your makeup. I mean, if we have to give a point in favour to Emilia Clarke in Last Christmas, she had messed up hair and makeup, but that at least was a little more relatable. Netflix kind of managed to save itself a little this year in terms of Christmas movies by creating a film which became incredibly popular called Jingle Jangle, A Christmas Journey. This is an old school, jolly Christmas musical film which is all over the top with joy and meaningful life lessons. Personally, it's not my kind of thing, but I can see why so many people enjoyed it, especially when picking something to watch with the whole family. It's the story of an inventor who, after having gone through hard times, is finally finding his way back, also thanks to the arrival of his granddaughter. Instead, the last Christmas film I watched is one which left nothing whatsoever inside of me. Now, to give you a little context, last year my family and I randomly stumbled across this film on Netflix called The Christmas Chronicles, and we ended up watching it and we really enjoyed it. It was light and simple, but it was a fun story of kids having to help Santa save Christmas. Well, this year they made a sequel called The Christmas Chronicles 2. It's more or less the same story, kids having to help Santa, but in a very chaotic and messy way with a lot of plot holes. The first one was sufficient. Next up on Disney Plus, I watched a film called Never Been Kissed. Now this is the film which makes you question why Disney will close an eye on a lot of issues while at the same time complaining a lot about others. Because this film is totally a teenage comedy. This is the story of a reporter who disguises herself as a high schooler and goes back to school and has to deal with all the school drama. But this includes sex and drugs and all these other bad things. I don't mind seeing this in a film, and I didn't even like this film anyway, but it just annoys me that Disney will go to extensively complain about one thing and then this just is available on Disney Plus. I really don't understand that. Anyway, I wouldn't particularly recommend it. And another film which didn't leave anything meaningful within me is Aloha. I found myself just having a blank stare for the whole duration of the film. This is the very bland story of a group of soldiers stationed in Hawaii who have a series of interactions. That's it. I don't know how else to put this. I don't have anything more interesting to say about it. Some of them are falling in love, others are having heated discussions about past missions. And the ending, don't even get me started on the ending. I just can't. Let's move on to better things. For example, I watched Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa, so one of the most famous Japanese films by one of the most famous Japanese directors. Now, I'm quite a newbie to the Kurosawa world. I know about his art, but in a more academic way, and I want to get to learn more and more about it. And Rashomon is a beautiful film which mostly focuses on various people who are given their own testimony on a murder, while flashbacks to what they're narrating are shown to the audience. But what I think a lot of people misinterpret about these films is that they believe they are something so distant from us, so old, so different. I know it's hard to feel engaged and captivated by something so different from what we're used to watching, but this is not so out of the world. This, for context, was released around the time Singing in the Rain was released. This was at least a decade after The Wizard of Oz. It's not something totally out of this world. Anyway, next on the list is The House at the End of the Street, in which we have Jennifer Lawrence in a horror context. This film isn't particularly good, but it could perform very well as that easygoing horror film with your friends on nights in which you don't want to get involved in the complications of more demanding horror plots like Get Out or The Lighthouse. Anyway, The House at the End of the Street is the story of a girl and her mother moving into a new house, but surprise, surprise, a gruesome double murder basically happened just behind the house, and that's why the price was so slow, sweetie. And things just get creepy in there in your classic horror movie style. Then I watched The Clapper, a movie which was recommended when I was looking for something like Paddleton and the Fundamentals of Caring, Carrie Pilby, It's Kind of a Funny Story, all these witty and kind of depressing comedy dramas. Well, The Clapper wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but it was still okay. It basically covers the story of a clapper, so basically a member of the audience in TV shows with scripted reactions, scripted questions, while also remaining anonymous. The point is not letting people realising it's the same audience across shows. It has to look relatable and realistic. But in the film, one day somebody notices this one guy being on all different shows, and he starts to have a sudden and odd popularity, which he struggles to appreciate, all while he's trying to develop a new relationship with a girl he really likes. It's not as good as the other films in the genre, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. There are better ones in that genre. Okay, next up we have, prepare for it, Pom Yorom Go Gyol Goriko Bon, which translated from my butchered Korean is spring, summer, fall, winter, and spring. I'm pretty sure if this were an American movie, it would have received a lot more attention than it currently has. I literally found it from a random pic on Tumblr, but I'm pretty sure that without it, I probably would have never discovered this. It's a very quiet, very Pacific story of a monastery run by two people, a Buddhist monk and his apprentice, and as the seasons change and the nature changes, even they grow old, learn mistakes, meet new people, evolve, learn about death and life and love. I would recommend this for some soul cleansing and for some reflection about life and the passing of time. Then I watched Layer Cake, a film people close to me had been insisting I would love. Now, I'm not going to speak too much about it because I watched it but on a day in which I was in a terrible mood, so I didn't end up particularly enjoying it, but I know it's because of my attitude that day. I'm going to rewatch it again in the future and speak to you better about it. Just like when a few months back I was in an awful mood and I ended up watching Heat, but I was just completely absent-minded and I said, I will speak about it again in the future. Anyway, in Layer Cake, Daniel Craig portrays a guy involved in a huge trade of drugs, which we all know leads to nothing good, all while he's trying to get out of that environment. I'll let you know what I think about it when I rewatch it in the future, but if you want to see it in the meanwhile, I know it's a pretty popular story. Then I watched a documentary called The Great Hack. Now, if you remember, a while back I was speaking about a documentary I really liked called The Social Dilemma, about how social media was created, how it actually works, and how we are enslaved by it, without ever becoming a conspiracy theory cringeworthy story. Well, this other documentary I watched, The Great Hack, is not on the same level, but it's similar, and it focuses on Facebook, on posts specifically targeted at certain individuals to influence the outcome of elections, the testimony of the CEO Mark Zuckerberg. It's a lot more technical and specific compared to The Social Dilemma, which was also way more engaging. So I'd recommend starting from there before moving on to this. As you can tell, I'm starting to move through the titles quite quickly, otherwise this video would be terribly long. Next up, I watched Dragon Ball Curse of the Blood Rubies, which is the first Dragon Ball movie ever made, dating back to the 80s. Now, a little context to this, I used to watch Dragon Ball as part of my comprehensive childhood cartoon watching experience, but not on a regular basis, whereas my boyfriend is a huge Dragon Ball fan. So a while back we started rewatching the older episodes, and now we decided to rewatch the old films. Now, Curse of the Blood Rubies is a rework of the original first episodes. So when the protagonist, Goku, actually starts meeting some of the meaningful characters for the rest of the saga, there's Bulma and Shenron. And in this particular film, we have an evil king who is on the hunt for precious rubies, but his quest ends up destroying areas of his kingdom where innocent people live. And this includes getting the Dragon Balls, and eventually his path crosses with Goku and the other characters, and an epic battle ensues from that. If you're a fan of the Dragon Ball world, going back all the way to the origins and rewatching the first works is a pretty amazing experience. Then I watched Wildlife, which reminded me that I have been neglecting Jake Gyllenhaal. Where are those times when I would just watch all of his films one after the other? Anyway, this film is directed by Paul Dano, who is better known for his acting roles. This is his first role as a director, and for being a director's debut, this was exceptional. The story focuses on the failing relationship between the main characters, portrayed by Carey Mulligan and Jake Gyllenhaal. They just can't seem to get along, and they have a kid over which they also fight. This film's strength is definitely the acting, and I'm pretty excited to see more on behalf of Paul Dano. We've nearly reached the end. Next up is an old classic film which I never got round to watching, and that is Stand By Me, which is also famous for being one of the few films in which there is River Phoenix, who died at a very young age back in the 90s. Stand By Me is a classic adventure coming-of-age film about a group of friends who set off on a mission in the countryside to look for a local boy who recently went missing. So it's all a long adventure, along which we get to know each of the characters and their personalities thanks to their interactions. In its simplicity, this film was critical in influencing many subsequent works. For example, a lot of people hate comparing Stranger Things to other films including kids, but actually at the audition for Stranger Things, the actors were asked to read lines from Stand By Me, and it's actually referenced in the title of one of the episodes. Then I watched a film called Outside In, which I had never heard about before. It's the story of a former convict who is getting back into society after over a decade in prison, during which many people advocated for his innocence. And one of these people who was by his side all the way was his school teacher. And when he is released, he feels very attached to her in a nearly obsessive way. And if it's not her, it's her daughter. This is a very little known film, but it has very few negative reviews. It's a pretty interesting concept. Then I watched Mr. Right, starring Sam Rockwell and Anna Kendrick. Now, as you know, I am a huge Sam Rockwell fan, but over the course of time, I realised I've never actually seen that many titles of his, so I've been trying to catch up with them over the time. For example, here in Mr. Right, he portrays a hitman who ends up dating a totally regular woman. And I think this film worked out so well because both Sam Rockwell and Anna Kendrick are both great in roles in which you can never tell if they're serious or not, which is kind of at the basis of this film. We're nearly reaching the end. The next film is one which made people very curious last year, and that is The Hunt. Now, The Hunt caught everybody's attention because it presents the concept of people being specifically picked to be hunted down and killed. But because of the nature of who the hunters are and who the hunted people are, the film was intended as a satire of a society divided by racism. But of course, this happened during the US elections when racism was a huge topic. So the film was cast in a very negative light and its release was delayed to this year. But politics set aside, this film isn't actually as good and engaging as you would expect it to be. The hunt aspect was frightening and kept you glued to the screen, but at the same time, the delivery, which was meant to be satirical and meaningful, was never fully developed. But now we've reached the last film on today's list, and that is Hillbilly Elegy. Now, this film kind of divided audiences. Some say it will be at the 2021 Oscars, while others criticize the storytelling. I personally enjoyed it, but I will leave it up to one's personal view. The protagonist of the film is a law student who has big plans for his future, but who suddenly has to return to his hometown because of his mother's drug addiction. This then reveals how his childhood was, growing up in a dysfunctional family, and I believe that regardless of your opinion on the overall film, the acting was this film's strongest point. But with that, we have reached the end of today's list. If you're still watching, thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end. I would love to hear what you've been watching, what you thought about all these titles. Leave a comment down below with your opinion. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.